Hi guys, so Sophie Ridge from Sky News challenged the Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi to explain how there is a massive divergence in funding when it comes to state versus private schools over the period of time the Tories have been in power. Now, before we hear his ridiculous excuse, according to data from 2019, 29% of MPs have been independently educated, compared to just 7% of the population. This was the same in the 2017 general election. Over half, 54% of the House of Commons went to comprehensive school, up slightly from 52% following the 2017 election. Of the 155 newly elected MPs in 2019, 62% were educated at comprehensive schools, while a further 22% went to independent schools and 14% were educated at grammar schools. Of the main parties, comprehensive schools were attended by 41% of Conservative MPs and 70% of Labour MPs. 16% of all MPs attended a grammar school, in comparison to 17% of MPs elected in 2017. 7% of the general population attend independent schools, in contrast to 41% of Conservatives and 14% of Labour MPs. Of the 173 MPs who went to independent schools, 11 went to Eton, including Boris Johnson and, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
The schools have struggled, haven't they, with years of effectively underfunding. I just want to show this graph that I think we should be able to bring up now. This is the funding gap between state and private schools since the Conservatives entered power. You can see the change of funding, the change of per pupil funding. So you can see there, the blue line is private schools. That's the fees that parents pay per pupil in private schools. The red line is state school spending per pupil, and this is the change per pupil. The dotted line, 2010, when the Conservatives entered power. If you're a parent looking at this, what do you think you would conclude about how the Conservatives prioritise state school pupils?
So you'll remember in 2008-9, that was the financial crash and the crisis that led to us having to tighten our belts. And
so it's because of the financial crisis or crash that it was necessary to tighten our belts, and we had to cut funding for education. So we had to throw children under a school bus, not under a bus, but throw them under a school bus because we needed to protect who? Businesses, banks. We funneled money into banks, but we didn't funnel money into schools. I've said before how education and health should be fundamental to every society. If governments don't look after the health of their citizens and the education of the next generation, what's the point in having a government?
Of course, try and get the economy back on its feet. Thank goodness we managed to do that, because then we got the pandemic where we've had...
We got the economy back on its feet. You know what goes along with this as well? A rise in food bank usage. So he's trying to say that, well, austerity didn't exist. Is that what he's trying to say? That we got the economy back up, and then everything was going well. There was no real poverty. But if we look at the graph, there was no economic crash in 2012 or in 2016 or in 2020. That's all. It only started to recover after 2020. So you can't even use the excuse, well, we had to cut back following the financial crisis. Actually, the problem with that argument as well is that the financial crisis came in 2007, 2008, when the Labour government were in charge, and the Labour government continued to invest in education. It's the Conservatives, as soon as they came into power, they cut funding for state schools.
State school pupils.
So you'll remember in 2008-9, that was the financial crash and the crisis that led to us having to tighten our belts and, of course, try and get the economy back on its feet. Thank goodness we managed to do that, because then we got the pandemic where we've had to spend 400 billion making sure that people's jobs are protected and, of course, businesses are protected. But if you look at the settlement I've just got, is an additional 7 billion by 2024-25, Much of it front-loaded, by the way. So 4 billion of that comes early.
It's effectively restoring per pupil funding to 2010 levels. You've got a lost decade, haven't you, effectively, of growth in funding for comprehensive schools and state school pupils.
But also, as I just explained, we had to get through the financial...
Does anyone actually believe this? Does this work on anyone? The idea, yes, we needed to cut funding to education because there was an economic crisis. But we didn't cut funding to banks, for example. We propped up the banks, but we had to cut it from somewhere. So we cut it from education. We destroyed a future generation. Now, of course, you can see on this graph how, well, private schools, their funding increased. So people were funneling money into private education while the public schools, the state schools, I should say, were going down the toilet in a sense economically. But this is part of the Tory modus operandi, is to convince people to stop sending their kids to state schools and send them to private schools. It's all about this privatization policy that they have. Same with the healthcare. Same with the NHS. If you have a problem, if you don't want to wait, just go to a private clinic. Go private. You pay more, but you get service immediately. You get treated immediately. This is always the Tory policy. Of course, they're going to apply it to education as well.
Financial crisis
on the backs of
collapse.
State school pupil funding.
Well, but the important thing is to continue that investment now and deliver. It's not just the 7 billion, by the way.
Of course, what did he say? He said we're going to invest in 2024. Not this year, not next year, but 2024. Now, why is he mentioning 2024? Well, because there's an election coming in 2024. So he can come out and say, look, we're investing in education. We haven't invested in education over the last 12 or 13 years, but we're investing in education this year in 2024, just in time for an election.
I've got 5 billion for recovery as well. Part of that is the National Tutoring Programme. These are important investments in school. And of course, teachers have done a brilliant job. If you think of what they've had to come through, including, of course, dealing with Omicron.
What's that got to do with funding? What's that got to do with the economic crisis? What's that got to do with the last number of years, 10 years? Yeah, the teachers are doing a wonderful job. Once again, does this actually work on anyone? Is anyone actually convinced by this? We threw teachers, schools, children, students, everyone under a bus over the last number of years. If they didn't like it, well, parents could choose to send their kids to a private school, which is more expensive, of course. So we create a bigger divide. And as Sophie Ridge has said, there's been a lost decade here. Now we're going to invest a bit, just in time for a general election. But as I said at the beginning of this video, these people do not care about the poor and the working class. Most of them went to private schools, and most of them will send their kids to private schools. So it's not in their interest. It's none of their concern to actually invest in education. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.